Well, hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Louis Ayat. In the food industry, I represent Roja, a world leader in synthetic and natural colors. So if you need colors, please don't hesitate to call me. The food industry also brought me to become a member of the CIFST, and I've been a member since 1994. As part of the CIFST 70th anniversary campaign, long-term members, some of you might have seen this beautiful gray-haired face and looking away from the camera and looking into the future. Well, part of that future is unfolding now, as I am the currently president-elect of the CIFST National Board, and it will be a privilege and an honor for me to become the next president of the CIFST National. I am following great people and have some big shoes to fill. However, I can assure you that we have a great team and great things, so please stay tuned. On behalf of CIFST, welcome to our 2021 Table Talks webinar series, the Learning Trough, where we bring you regular webinars that explore the future of food. If you haven't already, please visit the CIFST website for a list of upcoming webinars, which will continue every second week between September and November. If you're a member of CIFST, registration for the entire webinar series is free. If you are not a member, what better occasion to become a CIFST member and be part of this great organization? A special thank you to Dempsey Foods for their generous sponsorship of our webinar series. Today's topic is preserving plant genetics resources for food security with Dr. Axel Diederichsen, research scientist, curator, Plant Gene Resources of Canada. Welcome, Axel. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you. It's a big honor, and I hope it will be enjoyable.
Okay, thank you, Axel. So before we get to the presentation portion of the webinar, I'm going to ask Axel an icebreaker question to warm things up. Well, baking during the pandemic became extremely popular. So Alex, did you take out your pots and pans and join the trend? Or did you delve into hobbies while you were cooped up at home during the many COVID-19 lockdowns?
Thank you. That's a very interesting question. I don't want to brag, but maybe I was ahead of the trend because I have making bread for a while at home, and I always make a rye bread, and the rye dough has to go through a fermentation. Several of you are very advanced in food science, you will know it. So it's a sourdough I preserve, and from that I make rye bread because that is what I was brought up on, and I really like it.
Well, thank you very much for sharing part of that. So if you have any questions for Axel, please write them in the question box, and Axel will attempt to answer them during the question and answer period, which is going to be at the end of the seminar. So without further ado, over to you, Axel.
Thank you very much again. I hope you see my screen now. This is the first slide. Can you confirm that you see the screen?
We see it.
Yeah,
very
we
good.
see it. Thank you.
Thank you. So the title of my presentation is Preserving Plant Genetic Resources for Food Security. I work at Plant Gene Resources of Canada, which is the Canadian National Gene Bank for plant genetic resources for food and agriculture. It's hosted by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. We have the seed collection here, and I'm located in Saskatoon at the Saskatoon Research and Development Center. Since we talk about food, I like to start with this slide. And I start with a question: what is wheat? I can share with you that I grew up on a farm, and I always thought I have a good idea what wheat is and what oat is and so on. I was corrected later, but let's start with what is wheat. There are two basic types. One is the bread wheat, from which is a usual wheat bread is made, and it's about that 60 kilogram of wheat flour are used for each Canadian per year for making bread. The other wheat, principal wheat, is durum wheat, Triticum durum, and about 4 kilograms of pasta are consumed by each Canadian per year. So you see, wheat is pretty important. You see that there are Latin names for these two species. On the species level, they are distinct at Triticum aestivum and Triticum durum. So that's already important to know. Sometimes we use the term wheat and we are not really sure. So taxonomy is helpful also for understanding what wheat is. Where did wheat come from? Wheat originated actually in the Near East about 10,000 years ago from some wild species, which you see on the right slide of this, on the right side of this slide on the topic. These are wild grasses native to the Near East, and somehow they contributed to making the cultivated wheat. The wild ones shatter seeds, have smaller seeds, and all the typical features of wild plants, while there's a major step that then the cultivated species came up, spelt, and then the bread wheat and the durum wheat, and then there are other species of wheat. Einkorn was one of the first also that was cultivated. That happened in the Near East. It's very difficult or very little understood until today how this really was brought about. It's a major achievement of culture, you can say. Many species were involved. We sometimes refer to the area where this happened to the Fertile Crescent, because many crops that are important for agriculture in Europe and North America have their origin in this area. Wheat in Canada is very important. As I mentioned, I'm located in Saskatchewan. You see here the largest proportion of wheat production in Canada occurs actually in Western Canada, or in Saskatchewan. And there's winter wheat a little bit, a lot of spring wheat, and also some durum wheat. The first wheat was grown in 1605 in a French settlement by Samuel de Champlain in Port Royal in what is today Nova Scotia. Now I'd like to share a story with you of a very famous wheat in Canadian history, Red 5. Red 5 is a wheat that spread widely through North America and Canada, was very important for starting agriculture, in particular also in Western Canada. And the history is very interesting. It came actually to Canada from Glasgow in Scotland, because there was a farmer in Canada, David 5, who had a friend in Scotland. He farmed here and was looking for wheat adapted, and a friend in Glasgow went to the port, this is how the story goes, and took his hat and took a scoop out of a sack of wheat and sent this to his friend in Ontario, what is now Ontario. This ship came from Gdansk, which is in Poland, a port, and was brought there from Galicia, which was a province in the Austrian Empire at that time, in the middle of the 19th century. So this wheat then was grown by Mr. 5 in his garden, and then something happened. David 5 planted it, and he planted it in spring, because the winters are very hard here, and most of the plants planted were winter wheats, so they didn't shoot, they didn't produce a head. So only a few produced heads. Then the 2 oxen of the farm went into this plot and started foraging on that. The wife of David 5 chased them out and saved 3 plants. And these 3 plants gave the origin of Red 5. It was a spring type, had earliness, has red grains, so therefore the name Red 5. It was very important due to its early maturity and had good baking quality for starting the success story of agriculture based around wheat in Canada. We have this sample also in our gene bank. Here's the accession number and the botanical classification. This shows now the bigger picture behind this. I showed you this wheat and I showed you also what happened there. We had the wild species to start with. A few of those contributed to the cultivated species. Then there were many, many land races developed all over. Only a few were used for modern agriculture, for breeding also. And then breeding programs got reduced. So only a few lines is what we have today. So the genetic base is narrowing. This is from a paper, this graph from a paper by Tanksley and McCouch, 1997, a very fundamental paper. I think we need to look a little bit broader at this because, of course, we have all this narrowing, the funnels, but we also have the widening that needs to be shown. During evolution, wild species widened. The early domesticated diversity widened because many people were involved, spread the weeds. And then there were maybe plant breeding started with a few, but there were many, many plant breeders, a lot of activity, which is now reduced. So it's reduced. So what I say, agrobiodiversity is a product of culture. It is in our hand. Whether it's less or more, we decide it. So the Canadian Gene Bank, where I work, has the task to contribute to the preservation of this diversity. It was established in 1970. We focus on germplasm economic for Canada, of economic relevance for Canada. The main deliverables of our gene bank is viable germplasm to clients nationally and internationally, small amounts, relevant information about the germplasm, and we make contributions to the conservation of plant genetic diversity for food and agriculture. So our focus is on the diversity of cultivated plants and crop wild relatives. Last year, we celebrated our 50th anniversary. What do we have? We have modern cultivars, for example, Flax McGregor. We have old cultivars, Canadian cultivars, for example, the wheat Marquis. We have land races like the Red 5 that was not yet touched really by breeding. If you don't call the selection by the oxens a kind of breeding there. And then we have crop wild relatives, for example, wild oats. And we have also native Canadian germplasm, for example, strawberry. We keep this germplasm viable. We have to grow it from time to time in the field to harvest fresh seeds. And we describe the basic feature of the material during this process. Here you see the holdings, the total holdings of our gene bank. It's more than 110,000 accessions, with about 80% are the cereals, barley, oat, and wheat, but then also forages and crucifers, oil seeds, and so on. But the focus is on agricultural crops. We have large collections, world-based collections for barley and oat, and also for millet and some oilseed brassica. We have 3 locations that work together for this exercise. At Saskatoon, where I am, we have the seed germplasm. In Harrow, Ontario, we have fruit germplasm, and in Fredericton, potato germplasm. These 3 locations of Agriculture Canada, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada together form the Canadian National Plant Germplasm System. Why is Canada investing in this? This is expensive. Well, once more back to the history, I said you that the introduction of an exotic wheat or new thing, the Red 5, was very important. And this Red 5 is in the pedigree of nearly all wheat varieties that are grown today. Another wheat was brought in brought even more earliness, which was very important for growing wheat in the prairies, introduced from Russia, Ladoga. Hard red Calcutta, introduced from India, contributed rust resistance, which is another feature of critical importance for successfully growing wheat, in particular in the prairie provinces. So Canada depends also on introduction of these genetic resources from other countries, and they are disappearing there. So therefore, it's good to have them available to preserve them. Another more recent example is the development of rapeseed that started already during World War II, became big after 1945. The name canola appeared for this crop. It's based on germplasm from Argentina and Poland at the start. Lentils started only in 1970. The first cultivars were selected from lines introduced from the gene bank of the United States of America. And a recent example is an oilseed crop, Camelina, which was actually nearly extinct from agriculture, but could be retrieved from gene banks, in particular in Eastern Europe. Here's a very good book, Harvest of Gold, written by Al Slinkard, where you can read up several success stories of introduction and breeding of new crops important for Canada. William Saunders was a pioneer who was instrumental in these early works and worked at the Dominion Farm in Ottawa. Globally, many gene banks came about in the 1970s when many countries considered this is very important. Worldwide, there are now about 1,750 gene banks preserving about 7.4 million accessions. Here you see our Canadian gene bank. Here you see the central seed storage for the USDA. Here you see the Svalbard Global Seed Vaults, where many gene banks deposited duplicate samples in case our gene bank, for example, would be hit by a catastrophe. We can retrieve a small sample from here that we have deposited there. Seed storage is very important. This allows to store seeds over a longer period of time. Otherwise, we would have to grow everything every 3-4 years. Now we can store many seeds for 50 years without considerable loss of viability. Under dry air at +4 degrees, we have the working collection, and then we have long-term collection at -18 degrees in sealed envelopes. There the seeds really keep viability over a long period of time. This is a view from our storage vault here in Saskatoon. When we describe the material, we collect basic information so that we have the seeds and information for our clients, and we can gain interesting insights. Here, for example, Canadian spring wheat cultivars over time. We can see that plant height has decreased. 1,000 grain weight or 1,000 kernel weight has increased, so the seeds are heavier. The grains per spikelet has increased as a trend. If you look at the red 5 here at the beginning, this is this dot, and then the more recent cultivars. And the seed shattering at maturity has decreased drastically, which is due to the introduction of combines. So you have to adapt also to changing ways of agricultural practice, and this is ongoing up to today, that plant breeding has to adapt to these changes and needs our genetic resources we preserve. There are endemic genetic resources, fruit germplasm, just an impression here. This is from a walk I took last year in Saskatchewan, 150 kilometers north of Saskatoon, at a lake in Prince Albert National Park. All these are also plants and plant genetic resources, important as food sources and very important also for health foods, very trends that are becoming very important also, and economies develop around that. Germplasm distribution is very important. I said it's one of the main deliverables. Here is the trend over time. Since 2002, we have shipped close to 120,000 seed samples to 68 countries around the world. Here you see a heat map. 80% stay within Canada, and we have about 110 clients per year. A trend, you can see the demand for germplasm is increasing over time. we are a kind of broker, you can say, because what we have in our collection, you see here, for example, this is Canada. These would be accessions that origin also from Canada, and we distribute them to Canadian clients, but we distribute them to clients from all over the world, to Asia, Africa, and so on and so on. And then we have germplasm originating from these areas, for example, from the Near East, the origin of wheat, distributed to clients all over. It shows we are a kind of broker for genetic diversity of cultivated plants, and it's a world collection here, and we are connected to the world. Our catalog is published online, so there you can search for it. This is the address. The system is called GRIN Global CA. It's a gene bank information system that many national gene banks, but also international agricultural research centers use to make their holdings accessible. So this is now the summarizing slide. I should add before making these summarizing words that as I said, a deliverable is germplasm. We provide the samples, small samples. It will be 100 to 200 seeds, not more. So you have the genetic diversity to start with. We supply them free of charge, and we supply them for the purpose of plant breeding, of education, and for research. So there must be a valid reason. Then we will supply free of charge a small amount. And you saw that we supply a lot of germplasm. So you have to sign a standard material transfer agreement. This is due to developments that started in the 1990s, also regarding ownership and so on of germplasm, so that the terms of for exchange are regulated by an international treaty for plant genetic resources for food and agriculture. I didn't go much into the political part of this, but this summarizing slides really tells in very short what happened to plant genetic resources for food and agriculture, I should say, over time. We have it goes more than 100,000 years ago, the evolution of the crop wild relatives, which some of them were domesticated or bred or mingled, and we don't really understand what happened there. The domestication, a major step. Then we have the diversification. Many land races developed wherever the farmers went and were. Adapted to the local conditions, and the priority was security of yield. It was food security. It was not necessarily maximizing of yield, but stability. So the usage of this diversity was very important. Only in the probably for crop plants in the 19th century, the scientific recognition of this diversity started, and it was plant breeders who were instrumental and realized this, and botanists, so the two together. Then the exploitation started with modern plant breeding. Plant breeders understood this is important, and we can improve what we can supply to our farmers, and we can improve our food stability by making systematic use of this. It was also the next step that plant breeders realized we are losing these land races. Plant breeders produce new cultivars that spread widely, are accepted, but the land races are disappearing. And it was plant breeders who said we need to ensure that we don't lose them. And since farming accepts a lot of our modern cultivars, we need to institutionalize that. And they started actually gene banks. For example, the Russian gene bank in 1894 in St. Petersburg, the N.E. Vavilov Institute for Plant Genetic Resources, and the USDA also started a systematic gene bank system in the end of the 19th century at the same time, while the Canadian Gene Bank, as I mentioned, came about in 1970 as a centralized storage, although there were many collections before. What happened since the 1980s and 1990s in particular, and still ongoing, is that property rights start to play more and more a role. So the political aspects, you can read it very nicely up in this book here, Scientists, Plants and Politics, became very important for our area. And the most recent trend is the digitization of information associated with our material. And there are even claims around that maybe the digitized information could be more relevant than the genetic resource as such. So the key messages of my talk are that plant breeding is essential to adapt to climate change, changing crop usages, changing agronomic practices, and changing also towards more local production, which may be something that will become more important. That could even be an outcome of the crisis we are going through presently, that we really realize it may be a good idea to have things that can be produced locally. And we have very particular environmental conditions in Canada. And for many vegetables, for example, we are depending on introductions. Genetic diversity from gene banks like ours is essential for plant breeding because we have the diversity and it's easy accessible. So I like to conclude by saying that crop plant diversity is a cornerstone for building our future, and definitely that relates also to food security. I want to thank you by showing the picture of the PGRC team. This image was taken in 1990. Our operation got quite disrupted due to remote work. We are returning to more normal operations there, but this is the PGRC team at Saskatoon. And these people do the hard work behind the regeneration, characterization, handling of the sample, storage and distribution of the sample. And our database manager is on this picture. So a big, not such a big team, but a very dedicated team. And I have to thank them. But I also want to thank you as the audience for listening to this, and I will be happy to take questions now. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much for this presentation. Greatly appreciated. Okay, and to kick off the questions, I'm going to ask you one. They're talking about bringing back mammoths. Okay, any talk about bringing back any plants that have disappeared in the wild that would benefit us?
Excuse me, what talking about bringing back what? I didn't understand what you're saying.
Mammoths, the big elephants, the big prehistoric elephants.
Mammoths, okay.
Yes.
Okay. Well, luckily, mammoths are a little bit exotic, and they were not really used for, you know, elephants are kind of semi-domesticated in India, for example.
Right.
Mammoths are far away. In the animal genetic resources, there are ideas to bring back the original horse, the Przewalski horse from Central Asia, using also modern technologies. And I think partly something is ongoing there. It goes in the direction of Jurassic Park. For plants, luckily, we have these collections. They started early on, and plant seeds are relatively easy to preserve. Although we have many plants that are vegetatively preserved, so they are more challenging, and a lot of diversity has been lost. A lot has been lost there. We still have a lot, and as I said, if you have a broad base, it probably can widen again if we take good care and adapt to it. Okay. So I would say we are not lost. We don't necessarily need to go to extreme technologies, and maybe we should rather rely on a broad base, working in several spots with this material. I think we will be good.
Good, nice. Okay, so I haven't seen any questions yet. So what we'll do is we'll just conclude. So again, thank you very much. Axel, on behalf of CIFST, we thank you for this very informative presentation. And a reminder that we are hosting webinars every second Wednesday from September to November. They're free for all CIFST members. So please save the date for the next webinar, which is Wednesday, November 3rd, on a topic: consumer trends, nutrition, health, and food innovation, with speaker Rob Cole. Registration is now open on our website. So again, thank you very much, Alex. Learned a lot, okay? It was a great history lesson, and I think it is a lesson that we should continue to observe, because as you indicated, we realize that we need to be more independent with regards to growing our food and not relying on other nations. So again, thank you very much. Have yourself a nice day.
I thank you for giving me the honor to speak to this group. Thank you very much.
Take care. See you in November.
Goodbye.